코로나 시대 그리고 또 빠르게 변화하는 문명 시대에는 참 여러 가지 도전이 있는데요. 아울러 그만큼 종교가 얼마나 시대의식을 자각하여 이에 대해서 어떤 대응책을 마련해 놓을 수 있는가가, 그리고 세계와 인류에 어떻게 기여할 수 있는가가 참으로 많은 고민과 성찰을 하게 되는 시간입니다. 이어서는 고위급 대담 시간을 마련했습니다. 주제는 종교와 문명의 위기, 글로벌 도전과 종교적 대응입니다. 좌장으로는 박도연 유엔 종교 NGO위원회 공동의장님을 모셨고, 패널로는 아자카람 Religions for Peace 사무총장님을 모셨습니다. 그러면 고위급 대담을 이어가도록 하겠습니다.
반갑습니다. My name is Soyeon Park, joining you from New York City, and it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the 2022 Interfaith Coalition Conference. This is session 6 in our program, and today I'm privileged to speak with Professor Azak Haram on the theme of the crisis of civilization and religions, global challenges and religious responses. So let me introduce a little bit about Dr. Karam. So Dr. Azak Karam is the Secretary General of Religions for Peace and a professor of religions and development at the Brera University in Amsterdam. Prior to joining Religions for Peace, she served for nearly 2 decades in the United Nations, including as a coordinator of the Arab Human Development Reports, a senior advisor on culture, and lead facilitator trainer for the UN Strategic Learning Exchanges on Religion, Development, and Diplomacy. And during her time in the UN, she founded and was the convener of the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development, as well as the Multi-Faith Advisory Council of that task force. And I will stop here. So with that, we can spend more time with Dr. Karam. Again, it's our great pleasure to have you here with us today, Professor Karam. Would you begin by introducing your organization for those who are not familiar with Religions for Peace, including any values or activities that RFP wishes to promote these days?
First of all, thank you very much, Reverend Do-yoon, for the opportunity not only to be here in this context, but also, and obviously to great thanks to the organizers, but also, quite frankly, the opportunity to have a conversation with you. We go back a long way, and I have a great deal of respect for your good self, as well as the organization that you're in, the movement, the religious movement that you represent, that is also one of the board members of the World Council Members of Religions for Peace. So technically, when I speak with you, I speak to my boss, one of my bosses. I have over 60 bosses who are religious leaders representing their respective religious institutions. And that is precisely what Religions for Peace is. It's the United Nations equivalent, but of religious institutions rather than political or state states. It's the religious institutions and faith communities. And the reason it's important to say and faith communities is because not all religions, as you well know, and not all faiths are organized in an institutional format. So it's about the representation of the diversity, the totality of faiths as they exist in our world today. It's a unique organization because it has such a representation of all faith communities, from the Holy See or the Vatican or the Catholic bishops' conferences all the way to the indigenous communities in different parts of the world. And it's that realm of faith that comes together in Religions for Peace. Why is that important? For the same reason that the United Nations is important. It's a global multi stakeholder platform where people and institutions who influence deeply all the world's citizens and believers, they are there. They come together, and they've been there for the last 50 years. And we support. Essentially, it's a movement, a global movement to build social cohesion, to work towards the protection and the sustainability of the common public goods, the things that we all hold dear, that are absolutely necessary for us, the air, the environment, the water, peace and security, our rights as human beings, but also the rights of all living creatures. So it's the coming together of all these different parts of our belief systems and values that work together to support that which we are all dependent on. It's not as if the air that you and I breathe is not being breathed by others everywhere in the world. This is the global common goods. And just as governments are responsible for protecting and sustaining the global common goods, religious institutions and faith communities are equally responsible for that too. So this is the space where we try to work through interreligious councils that are fully nationally and locally owned and operated by the faith leaders and faith communities to come together and work to serve all together. And the principle of service is absolutely essential. It's about multi-religious service to all, barring none. So that whole idea of leaving no one behind, that is the main ethos of all the faith traditions, and that is the main ethos that motivates Religions for Peace to work together. So we work on mediation, peace building issues in different parts of the world. We work on education, we work on health, we work on various aspects of freedom of religion and belief, especially freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. And we work on gender equality and women's empowerment. So we work on all the things that have already been agreed to by faith communities since time immemorial, which is the welfare and the human dignity of each and every human being, as well as because these things interlink very closely with the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. So those 17 international development goals that are agreed upon by 193 governments, those are Religions for Peace, a strategic agenda, and have been, even before we had these 17 goals coined and called Sustainable Development Goals, these were always the common good and common welfare issues that religions working together for peace committed to.
Wow. And I'm sure you already know that we, as a longtime partner and friend of Religions for Peace, we also cherish and support your vision and your missions. And in One Buddhism, as we see that everything is in relation with one another. Yes. It means that we all affect the lives of others directly or indirectly. And you pointed out beautifully as an interconnectivity. Mm-hmm. And this is why we cannot and we should not neglect the suffering of others. Mm-hmm. So your emphasis on multi-religious service for all, this collaboration, that really fits nicely with my own belief that, yes, we do not suffer alone, nor do we heal alone.
You yourself are representing your community in the strategic planning exercise that we did together in December 2019 to come up with the strategic plan to which Religions for Peace is committed. So in a sense, you are co-owners of this agenda and co-designers of the agenda of Religions for Peace's work. And that's what makes the work so unique. It's not a group sitting in New York that decides what it's going to do. It's actually the religious communities coming together that set the frame of reference for what should be done, the accountability. And our job as an international secretariat in New York is to deliver and to support and facilitate the delivery with all of you. So it's not our vision, it's your vision.
Right. Yes, we'd be honored to be part of that great vision for all humanity. So with that in mind, I'd like to move on to the next question. So the COVID-19 pandemic has had widespread impacts on nearly every aspect of our lives. And it's not just coronavirus that requires our attentions, but there are many other pressing issues that we need to deal with, such as climate crisis, social justice, international conflicts, just to name a few. And some criticize the government's lack of leadership, and some also criticize the lack of religious leadership. So then what is your position here? So do you believe religious communities are fulfilling their responsibilities, or how could we as a religious communities respond more effectively to current crisis?
Let me say that I will answer as a combination of someone who serves as a secretary to all of you as religious communities. And I will also add in my answer my own analysis as a professor of religion and development in this space. So please understand that I'm not speaking on behalf of all of you, but as a servant to all of you and a researcher, if you will, as a student to this.
Yeah, I think that's even better.
So there's two aspects that I think are very important to highlight. One is that it's almost unfair and unjust to assume that religious communities can do more than they're doing already, because with the confluence of global pandemic, that is COVID-19, and the anticipation that there is more to come, and that we are already living in a extremely weakened global public health infrastructure, that means that any and all other diseases confronted and to be confronted will be a major cause for concern. So there's a public health pandemic, effectively, in many different contexts, which is a weak public health infrastructure. So no matter what the issue is, we're going to suffer trying to deliver to our people. The second is obviously the climate change that we have so systematically managed to dramatically ruin. And now we pay the price in terms of floods, in terms of scorched earth, in terms of so much that our planet suffers as a result of the fact that we didn't put the planetary well-being in mind when we struggle to industrialize as we have, and to build our technology and all the other infrastructure that we live on without taking into consideration planet Earth and Mother Earth. And the third is obviously the political dissonance that we see that is leading to a conflict in almost every corner of the world. It's not only Ukraine, Russia. It is literally every corner of the world, of our regional world, that has at least one, if not several, ongoing armed conflicts taking place within it. So conflict is the normal. And armed conflict has unfortunately become the normal in many contexts. So these three constitute major publicly shared crises that our world, everybody faces simultaneously, not some more than others. All of us face at the same time. And that's important to understand, that it's not one part of the world or one segment in one region. All of us face this. To ask religious institutions, who are the first responders anyway, in any context of humanitarian disaster or calamity, they are anyway the first responders. First, religious institutions are always serving as the first responders in humanitarian contexts, every corner of the world, everywhere. They are also, together, the original social service providers, schools, clinics, sanitation measures. It's actually religious institutions and religious organizations that have been serving communities and doing what we today call development. It's actually been the business of religious institutions since time immemorial. The first hospitals, as we know them, were set up inside churches and mosques and synagogues of old. The first schools, as we know them, were set up, and some are still being run by the churches and the mosques and the synagogues. So the understanding of social service that we today call development services is the original business of religious institutions since time immemorial. To expect that these institutions are going to do more is unfair, because they're already there. And in fact, we're talking about a weakening public service, which is governments and state infrastructure. It's the public health services that are run by the governments that are weakened today. So we are actually more reliant on the religiously provided health service infrastructure, more reliant on it today than we were before the pandemics. So the understanding that, oh, now religious institutions need to do more is silly, because they're working at 1,001%, right? To face all that they need to face. They're the originals. They're still there. They haven't gone anywhere. The challenge is not there. And that's my second point. The challenge is not in this. The challenge is not to ask religious institutions to do more. The challenge is, however, encountering a culture of pride that exists within every institution. And the culture of pride in a government institution, in a private sector institution, in any institution, in a civil society institution, in a religious institution, the culture of pride, as I call it, is this culture of, it has to be in my name, my territory, my organization is doing this, my institution is doing this. That is a culture of pride that I think even our religious entities have to be held accountable for. And we saw this culture of pride also take place and be very prominent during the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It became which institution is providing the services, and this almost this desperation to say, this is my institution's services. Yes, we are providing essential services. This is us. Our imprint looks like this. I think we have to challenge that culture of pride and territoriality effectively that takes place with every institution, whether they are governmental, intergovernmental, or non-governmental. And I am afraid, and I'm sorry to say, that I think the religious institutions are just as guilty of wanting the imprint of their particular organization or institution in this space. And that is what we have to challenge. And how do we challenge that? We challenge it by trying to serve the message that you need to work together. Just do something together. You're serving in the same communities, serving the same issues at the same time, but you each want to do it as organization X, institution Y, entity Z. Why can we not work together? Why can't at least some of this work, some of the services can be done together? Join forces to do it together. You provide the same services, do them together. Just try. And that's why Religions for Peace set up the Multi-Religious Humanitarian Fund. We did not need, this should not have been necessary, because the idea is that religions work together, right? That's the whole purpose of religion.
Right.
But we found that it was necessary to induce, to infuse, to negotiate, to facilitate that religious institutions work together, to deliver together in a time of global public crises. It was necessary to not only speak to it and remind of the value that we must work together to serve all, but that we had to facilitate it. We had to encourage it. Here's a little bit of literally seed funding to help you work together, right? And we realized very, very quickly that religious institutions, the largest religious institutions with the largest amount of funding and resourcing, were not prepared to invest in joint work. They were not prepared. They are not prepared. So that is what we need to challenge. That is what we need to hold some accountability for. Now, why will you not work together? How can we help you be more intentional and mindful to serve together, since we're serving the same issues at the same time for the same group of people?
Wow, that was beautiful. I mean, when you mentioned this cultural pride, I think that's something, yes, we really need to think about it. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of, for me, like it's ouch, but that's the reality. And I really personally, and within our Wombri's community as well, I think that's something we really need to reflect on ourselves. So that was, I really appreciate particularly that part of, yes, why we're doing this with maybe, from my institution, from my organization, we can make this as us as a whole. So I think that's something, wow, that I really appreciate that aspect. So I think you really mentioned a lot of things about, how as a religious institutions, how religious communities can contribute to the peace or harmony in the world. Especially from your experience serving at the United Nations and now as the SG of the Religions for Peace, if there's some other things that you want to add to, like what roles and responsibilities should religions play to promote this social justice and healing? I think you mentioned a lot, but if there's anything else that you want to add to that, it's your time.
I not so much. I think it's important to bear in mind that the most, when we, just as an experience, as a story, when we set up the multi-religious humanitarian funds, two things immediately became very clear very quickly, apart from the fact that we needed to set it up in order to infuse people to work together. We realized, one, on the not so positive side, we realized that the largest and most well-equipped and well-resourced religious institutions of the world were not prepared to invest in one another. On the more positive side, however, we realized that those who did apply for funding because they really did want to do things together and already had some amazing ideas and some very creative and innovative approaches in the midst of global public crises, that those who did so were women and youth. Religious women and religious youth. They were full of intentionality, mindfulness, determination to work together, and they had some brilliant proposals. And I think this is what gives hope, that we tend to look at the established religious institutions and their leadership And of course, we must continue to do so, to honor them and to support them and to facilitate that they can continue to exist and serve their communities, and hope that they can continue to do so together. But we also need to look at the women and the youth who are not necessarily in positions of senior-most leadership in these respective institutions, but are leaders by virtue of their service and their commitment to service to others. And those constituencies, and they are sometimes one and the same, religious women who are young, I think we do need to be much more, in a sense, grateful to these communities, to be much more mindful of observing them and acknowledging them, and to be much more deliberate in seeking to support them as they remain determined to work together, because that is where you create the normalcy of working together. As they grow in the service with one another, we find precisely that which we are looking for, which is a society or a set of societies where the religious communities are actually working together and serving everyone. That prototype is heaven. That's the heaven that we all admit. That's the enlightenment that we're all seeking, where we can all come together with our respective strength in our own faiths as we come together to serve all. That is what we need. And that's what the women of faith and the youth are actually able to do and continue to do. And we need to make sure that we just are mindful of that.
That's great. Yeah, I always appreciate your emphasis on women and youth, as I also see there are great potentials. And there are many areas where we need to work to fulfill all these responsibilities or roles that you have been mentioned here. And one of the key elements we in the Won Buddhism tradition we consider critical is education. And the education here we're talking about here is not as a means of pursuing degrees to gain more capital, but the education that gives us the values and attitudes and the support responsible global citizenship and commitment to peace, human rights, and sustainable development. So is global citizenship an ideal value? Is this a necessary agenda for our time, you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. But we have to be clear what we mean by it, because global citizenship can be misunderstood, I believe, as citizens of every nation stepping up to the plate, serving together in their own countries. But I think the concept of global citizenship is that we respect the national boundaries we are in, but also understand that each of these national contexts exist only and will survive only in as far as they are able to serve each other. Yes, so we cannot speak about a very powerful country on its own that's going to survive this whole cataclysmic series of crises, but we can and we must speak of how the citizens of every nation are able to serve those in other nations of every nation. So there's that citizenship of the globe, of a world that may well require service beyond the national boundaries. And that's the principle. But it also demands us to understand that we today have 80 million people who are stateless. 80 million who are stateless. That means they have no home, they have no state, they have no national entity that is prepared to look after them and serve their interests. Yes. Now, so that it makes it even more necessary that we speak of a global citizenship that transcends serving only those who are in a perimeter of a nation state, only those who are within the boundary of a nation state. We have to be mindful of the citizens that fall outside of the boundaries of nation states. They too are human beings. The land they inhabit has to be land that we also equally care for and take into account. Their rights as citizens of the world have to be as important as the rights of any citizens of any one nation. And I think that's the challenge that we confront, because we talk about nation states which are deeply protective of their own citizens, but not necessarily equally caring of those who are still human beings, very much so, rights, very much so, but don't belong to their particular nation state. So the concept of global citizenship has to be clearly understood as citizens of the globe beyond only the nation state boundaries. And that's a deeply threatening concept and context, but the one that religious communities are best able to serve, quite frankly, because religious boundaries do not stick to any one nation state. A religious community is not bound in its values, and it's especially in the values of its service. It's not bound to any one nation state. It must respect the rules of the nation state that it happens to be headquartered in, but it is not bound to only serve those within that. And I think religions per definition, and religious values per definition, religious institutions per definition transcend nation state boundaries, and they therefore stand to be in a good position to serve the interests and the well-being of all, right? But then what makes it threatening is if you say, okay, this particular church does not need to serve only the people in this country. They must be able to serve the welfare of all those who are in all the other countries. Yes, but how do you do that? You don't do that by making sure that it's only this church or only this mosque or only this institution or body that serves everyone from its adherents, but it can work with its counterparts in other religions, other religious institutions, other religious communities to serve all. So it doesn't need to threaten the nation state. It is about collaboration beyond the nation state with other religious actors that is essentially destined towards the well-being of all. Those parameters mean that no nation state should be in any way threatened by the work of different religious communities together across nations, because they understand that this is in the service of the well-being of all, not only of this community or this religious minority or this religious majority, but it is actually the well-being in the service of all. Wow. And that's another reason why it's important to work multi-religiously, because if there's only one organization trying, or one religious institution trying to serve the interests of its members in other countries, that's a problem right there. That's a threat right there to national security of several countries. But if it's all religious institutions collaborating to serve the welfare of all, who's that threatening? Why would that be a threat?
That you kind of point out a lot of aspects of, especially transcending our boundaries. And that's what we in our practice, we often say our practice is for the selfless service for all. So it's not only for, it's not only for my community, my Buddhist, my one Buddhist, all these things. So we have to really transcend all these limits and boundaries. Something that's what we can really think about, and we need to deliver that value into our day-to-day life. That is beautiful. So educational innovation, I hear that it's not only significant, but also it's inevitable in response to a global crisis. So the Transforming Education Summit was held at the United Nations, as you'll know, during the 77 sessions of the UN General Assembly this year. And we are within the One Buddhist community with other religious community together. We're planning to hold an international conference on transformative education for global citizenship and SDGs next year. And would you share some of your thoughts on what or how religious teachings and communities can contribute to the transformative education for global citizenship?
I can share some ideas. I'm not an expert in the field of education, so I can simply share some thoughts based on the work that Religions for Peace has been stewarding on educational aspects for a long time, and working in partnership with and entities such as the Arigato and the Global Network of Religions for Children, who have been doing quite a bit of seminal work on educational aspects. And I think there are two lessons that I take as key aways. The first is that, as you were saying earlier, it's not about necessarily the educational system per se. It's about the culture of how people think. It's that how do you feed into the mind and heart and soul of human beings from an early age, so that they grow up with this understanding of the interconnectedness between all of us, with the fact that we are all actually one body, and what will hurt one will hurt the other, and no one is safe until everyone is safe. How do we build that into our culture of awareness? And how do we build that into a consciousness? How do we build that consciousness? That is what we mean when we talk about transformative education. It's beyond a curricula. consideration. It's beyond an infrastructure consideration of a school or a college or a university or a set of them or a network of them. It's about building up a consciousness that is imminently connected to understanding that we are all one. Yes. How do we build that consciousness? That's what transformative education that is religiously led, that is religiously inspired, needs to be about. It's building that consciousness from a very early age and walking together with that consciousness so that we stay connected. It's not just about something that we're going to learn from when we're, at the age of 7 or until the age of 11, and here's the curriculum, but it's about how do we accompany each other in that journey of consciousness as we serve on our time on this earth, right? That to me is what transformative education is about. It's the building of the consciousness. What does it take? How do we do it together across the different religious values, with different religious values? And at the same time, what is that process of accompaniment looking like? That is transformative education. Now, with that understanding, I think the question becomes, what is it? If we have that vision that we're building that consciousness and it's about that and it's about the accompaniment to it, how do we work backwards from that to what we need today? What do we need to actually practically do today? Because that sounds really beautiful, but how? How, right? What does it mean? And I think we'll find perhaps many gaps, obviously, in our current educational systems that fall short of helping us reach that target of a global consciousness and the understanding of the systematic accompaniment that we need to do with one another. We'll find several gaps in our existing educational spaces. One of them, to me, and of course this is deeply contentious, but one of them is that we actually don't teach children about religions, different religions. Some of us are very worried about having children learn about religion at all. Some of us are very worried about having our children learn about other religions, and we think, no, we need to ground them in our own religion first before we expose them to everything else, and it is very confusing, So we have these two, if you will, polar extremes of ideas about educational systems when it comes to religion and values. The one that says nothing at all, or just teach generic secular values, and one that says only my own religion and only my own tradition. And then we'll see what else, and maybe nothing else is necessary. And those are, to me, those are both highly problematic. And those are what has led us to where we are today, where we have easily have stereotypes about different religions in general. We have stereotypes about one another's religions and values, and we tend to be much more comfortable with a sense of superiority about our own position in our own religion, our own secularism, our own whatever it is, because we are ill-informed about each other's faith traditions, because we are ill-informed about the different faiths and that have informed our value system. We have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is based on that which is common to all religions, but we don't even know that. Many of us who think of human rights and even advocate for human rights don't even realize that we have this precisely because we have different faith traditions, and the common values of all is and are human rights. We don't know that. We've lost that connectivity tissue, if you will. So I think it's about, when we work backwards from that global consciousness and the accompaniment and testimony and witness to one another through life's journey, we realize that we don't teach our children in schools about each other's value systems. We don't. And I remember I come from a very traditional context where I studied in Egypt, when we did have classes on religion, as in elementary school and in secondary school. We did have classes on religion, but it was this very awkward situation where the Muslims would stay in one class and the Copts or the Christians go to another class. And I always thought that was really bizarre. Why are we separating to each learn about our own religion when we both live in the same land and are nurtured by the same values, and we come together in the morning and we sing the national anthem, but when it comes to the class on religion, each one of us goes to a separate classroom and studies their own, and we don't even know what the other person studied, right? So there's something fundamentally wrong in that system, where we agree that we need to have religion and religious studies, but then we dissect and separate based on the respective religions. Something is wrong in that model. So, but something is equally wrong in the model that says nothing about religion, absolutely nothing about religion. We don't do religion. That's equally wrong, because what values then are we teaching? And how do we teach those values if can we talk about the salinity of water if we do not know from which ocean it comes? Can we talk about the salinity of water if we don't know that in the oceans it's salty? We can. So how do we understand values without understanding where they come from? If we think secularly and we think we can just teach values and ethics, but we don't need to teach religion, really? So let's talk about the salt in the water, but let's not understand that the ocean is salty. That's essentially the metaphor that I can think of. There's probably many more better metaphors, but that I think is what we have to be very mindful of. And we need to teach our religions to our children so that they grow up at least understanding and with a basic awareness that there are multiple faiths, that they actually may be advocating for very similar values. But here's the beauty of the creation and the creator, that we have such diversity of faiths that inspire everyone around the world.
And one thing, when you mentioned very strongly in the beginning about culture of awareness and culture of consciousness, you know, especially as a Buddhist practitioner, this awareness and consciousness is really kind of our foundation. So now I'm, you know, really it's coming back to myself, like, you know, what is it that from my spiritual tradition, I'm not always asking answers from the outside. You know, now maybe it's time for me to really look in, and then how we can serve in that capacity. So that's something maybe as an individual and as a one Buddhist practitioner, I think that's something I need to reflect on in a deeper and longer term. So thank you for giving that
thank you for
of thoughts.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Actually, I'd love to hear your own reflections on this as well.
Well, now I have a rather simple question. And yet I know
let's keep it short, I promise. Yes, go ahead.
I know simple questions doesn't always, you know, yield simple answers. So the question is, well, do you think religious values and practice can really change the world? And if so, and as the SG of RFP, what would you ask of various religious communities to promote peace, justice, and harmony for all?
So as a servant to the Religions for Peace movement, not RFP, we try not to use that too much, but as a servant to the Religions for Peace movement, I would say that I have absolutely no doubt that religions impact powerfully, and that religious practices are a very powerful behavioral, attitudinal influencer. Okay, I think they're the most powerful influencers. Religious practices, religious values are the most powerful influencers in the world. I believe that. I have seen it. I am a product of it. I know that in most societies, even in societies where the rate of non-belief is increasing, I still see and notice that there's a very powerful role for religious values and practice. Huge. So that for me is not even debatable. We know even when people don't believe, they don't believe because of what they see as behavior from those who believe, because of what they hear as impacts of behavior and attitudes from those who believe. So there's a very strong correlation between believing and practice and how people behave. Very strong. So noting that, and that being the premise, I can say that the issue is not whether religions impact on behavior, but it is how they impact on behaviors. Unfortunately, the behavioral change science has been very secular in its implementation and understanding, right? It assumes that behavior is impacted by anything except religion, which to me is a very bizarre foundation of life, quite frankly, but that is a worldview of certain secularists, and fair enough, that's their worldview. I think it's not representative of the world. The issue then becomes, how is it that religions influence behavioral change? And there's enough research scientifically to make that connection. What is missing, Reverend Doyun, is when religions work together, when religious institutions, when religious believers work together to serve their communities and their joint interests together, that is ill-studied and underappreciated. And that's what we need to change. We need to change that awareness that we have from a very early age onwards in all our educational dynamics, in all our policy practice. We need to change that understanding that when religions work together for the common good, that's when the common good actually takes place. Right? And what we need to go back to the points raised earlier, it's the accountability of different religious institutions and faith actors, the accountability to serving with each other, everyone, right? Serving everyone, but doing it with each other. Not enough, and by no means wise, to only think of how are the Catholics accountable for the world's welfare? How are the Protestants accountable for the world's welfare? How are the Buddhists, the multiple account? No. I mean, fine, great. If you want to do that, by all means. But how is it that when religious institutions work together, when believers in different religious NGOs work together towards the same ends, which is the welfare and dignity of every human, how is it that we actually do manage to achieve those targets? And we do change? That, to me, is the heart of what we should be trying to do. And we don't do enough at all.
Wow, what a powerful message you just shared. It really resonated with me because I know it really came from your lived experience. Because I feel the same energy and dedication I felt the day I saw you at a UN conference room more than like 10 years ago. I think close to like 15 years ago.
Probably.
I was with Venerable Chong-Li, you remember?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and at the time, and for me, you and Venerable Lee were like my role models. As a woman, as a leader, as a spiritual seeker, as a peacemaker. So I really hope you know that your presence is an inspiration for many people like myself. So this leads to my next, probably the last question for today. So you have achieved outstanding accomplishments in various fields while working in the United Nations, NGOs, and academia. So what advice would you give to the next generation of religious peace activists?
Love fiercely. Love fiercely. There is no other power more potent than the love that we can have for one another and for everything living and breathing in our, which is everything, trees, grass, blades of sand, but love fiercely. I think that's the one thing I would share for anyone who wants to work in any field. But it has to be the love of the other as opposed to the love of ourselves. It's not an invitation to be narcissistic by any stretch of the imagination. That's the biggest danger we all face. Our world crumbles because of narcissism. Our world is deeply endangered because of narcissism. It is to love one another fiercely. That is, frankly, the most important thing to do in life. We will take that with us to our grave. People always wonder, what do we take with us when we die? We take love. We most certainly take love, and we take it to beyond our deaths. We take it to other lives, and it breeds beautifully in this life too.
But actually, I want to add one very last for your insights, because I know you went like working outside, and you were abroad for maybe 6 weeks. You were like all over the globe. How do you balance yourself with your work and your inner peace? That will be the last piece that we'd like to hear from you.
Yes. So here is where all the other good stuff crumbles. Everything I've said that was so nice and powerful now just crumbles into nothingness, because I think I don't manage very well, to be honest. And I think that, yeah, there is one really important point to this love fiercely piece of advice, which is that we have to honor our ability to give love and to serve. And that in order to do so, we have to look after ourselves better than I currently do. I'm not very good at it. It's one of my many lessons to learn in this life is how to be considerate of self in order to be able to serve that mission of fierce love. You have to look after yourself, especially as women, by the way. I think girls and women have a harder time accepting that, well, girls and women from a certain part of the world, of a certain part of socialization, and perhaps a certain age, have a harder time accepting that we are worthy of love and care and nutrition ourselves. It's much easier and much more spontaneous and to be giving than to be receiving. And in fact, I'm learning, I'm not very good at it, but I'm learning that in the act of giving, there is receiving. And that we have to allow ourselves to receive that too, because we often put it away. Like when you said, oh, very powerful several times, I was like, no, not really. But actually to allow that, I allow myself to receive that wisdom and the kindness that you give by saying that's powerful, to allow myself to receive that without feeling the ego, just even to allow to receive it as kindly as it was given is a big deal, is an effort, is a skill. And learning how to look after oneself by accepting as we give, that is not something that comes easily to us. And I think we need to help one another in that. We need to love one another through that, to teach each other how to give and how to receive. That reciprocity is really essential for anything that we would do. And you're right to point it out. And I'm very grateful to you for that.
Oh, thank you. Again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And we really appreciate your presence, your leadership, and your faith, not only in your own particular, religious faith, but your faith in the good of all. So
thank you very much, Reverend Doyen.
Thanks. And thank you to everyone who is watching this with an open heart. So let us be the peace, justice, and harmony that we want to see in this world. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.